Hi, everyone, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Very welcome to this slightly spontaneous live stream that me and Ben have put together. I want to start by explaining a little bit what it is you're seeing, because we are broadcasting this on all three channels, both Captain Speaking, Mentor Now, and Mentor Pilot. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to reach as many of you as possible. I am here today because this incident that has just happened on the 21st of September in Nice has apparently stirred up quite a lot of feelings. I'm getting emails from left, right, and center about this, and I understand that when I read what the press is writing about it. There's no question that there has been a very close call in Nice on Sunday. And what you are seeing right now is a version of our podcast, Captain Speaking, that actually has its own YouTube channel, but you can also find it anywhere where you find your favorite podcast. And it's always me and Ben, who's just about to introduce himself. We are there, and we are always going to be talking about things like this, but in a very unscripted manner. So what you see here is what you get. And Ben, do you want to say a few words of who you are?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ben, good friend of Petter's. We've been working together in the aviation world, but obviously a lot more recently in the YouTube world as well. But like Petter, I am a 737 captain. I'm a Boeing type rating instructor and examiner, and Petter and I have worked in numerous ways. But here tonight, we're going to unpick what we know so far, which isn't much, but we're going to unpick and kind of get rid of any myths that may be out there and try and explain what happened on that night.
Yeah, and it's super important to point out here that there's not even an interim report on this incident yet. And the only reason that we are able to discuss this and to show what we know so far with you is because no one was hurt, right? At least not physically. So without further ado, let's have a discussion about what we know so far. So
Sure.
We know that on the 21st of September, pretty late in the evening, so it was 23:32 local time in Nice and France, an EasyJet Airbus A320-200 with the flight number 4706 was lining up for departure towards Nantes from Nice runway 04 right, which was the runway that was in use for departure at the time. And runway 04 left, which is the parallel runway, the one you can see on the left here, was the one that was used for landing. And as you can kind of see from the black marks on this picture, runway 04 left is the one that is normally used for landing in Nice, while the runway 04 right, which is longer, is normally used for takeoff under normal circumstances.
Yeah, right.
So as the EasyJet flight was taxiing out and getting itself into position for takeoff, a Novel Air flight that was going from Tunis towards Nice was on final approach. And we don't know what kind of final approach. We're going to be discussing that very soon. The flight number was Bravo Juliet 586 anyway. It had taken off an hour and a half earlier and was now on final approach in. And for some reason, we don't know exactly why, that aircraft ended up on final onto runway 04 right instead of runway 04 left. And it proceeded all the way down to what we can see according to Flight Radar 24 and other ADS-B services, down to an altitude of only around 50 feet over the runway before it initiated the go-around. Now, for context here, first of all, Flight Radar 24 has gone out and said that they cannot guarantee the accuracy of the altitude that close to the ground, so it can be plus minus 25 feet from what's indicated on their applications, which means that it could have been anything from 75 feet down to 25 feet. But we're pretty sure that it's not 25 feet because the height of the tail fin of the EasyJet Airbus would have been about 38 feet. So no matter what, where this happened, if it happened at 75 feet or 50 or even lower than that, this was an incredible close call. We haven't seen any ATC or listened to any ATC recordings for it, so we don't know what kind of clearances were issued from Nice Tower. But we do have some initial reactions from passengers on board, and what they thought that they felt, and they thought that they felt turbulence in the aircraft, in the EasyJet aircraft. They thought they felt the turbulence of the Novel Air flight overflying them. We're a little bit skeptical about that, for the simple reason that if you're standing on the ground, you won't feel that much vibrations, even from aircraft, taking off on a parallel runway very close to you. So it's a possibility that maybe the aircraft was actually starting to roll, and that the pilots in the front stopped rolling when they realized what was happening, and that was what people in the aircraft was feeling. But again, we don't really know for sure. What we do know is that the EasyJet flight stopped. They taxied back again into the terminal, disembarked the passengers and canceled the flight. And the Novel Air flight did a normal go-around, and then they came back in for another successful landing attempt, and everyone landed safely. So we know that much.
Yeah.
Right. The rest is kind of up in the air still. But why are we doing this, Ben? Why are we doing this podcast, do you think?
Well, there's a number of reasons, I think. There's a lot of people asking questions. You're getting a lot of questions. I'm getting a lot of questions on what we think about this. There's also a lot of nonsense being spread around online, as you often do see from mainstream press when it comes to reporting on aviation incidents. One such example said that both aircraft was packed full of 300 people. I'm yet to see an A320 with 300 people in it, but there's a lot in there. So I think the main reason today is just to shed a genuine light on what we do know, what kind of these procedures are, how we fly them, what threats and challenges we face when we're flying these types of approaches, because it's a very non-standard approach into Nice. I've flown it many times, and we can just kind of take this apart so you can make your own decision.
Correct. So obviously the BEA, which is the French Aviation Authority, has opened an investigation into this. They're classifying this as a serious incident, which they definitely should. And that means that there will be probably an interim report coming in about 30 days or so. And then we're going to have a final report happening generally for something like this, maybe within a year or so.
Yep.
When they have investigated everything. But because we never speculate, or we try to avoid it, and we just don't know here. What we can do is we can have a look at, you, for example, Ben, have actually flown into Nice. Yeah. So we can have a look at what kind of procedures are available and compare those with what's on Flight Radar 24 and see if, what kind of approach would this Novel Air flight have done. And also, there are many possibilities here. This could be human error of one sort or another, but that could be both in the cockpit and in the ATC tower. So there are many possibilities of what could have led to an aircraft doing an approach into what was obviously the wrong runway in this case. But let's have a look, shall we, on the ADS-B data that we have for the Novel Air flight and have a look at what it looks like.
Yeah, if we can bring that up on screen now. So what you're seeing here is, there's obviously a couple of traces here, but the first approach that they flew was the inner green line, if you like. You can see Antibes and Cap d'Antibes there, the little bit of land that sticks out. The normal approach into Nice in good weather is just east of that, which is this inner line that you can see. And then you position in the bay onto the extended center line of normally runway 04 right. And that's what you're seeing here. And as you can see, if you kind of look closely at that final approach, that last bit of yellow going up to the runway, you can see it's a little bit wobbly, which might be indicative of a visual approach as the crew are kind of centering themselves onto that center line visually without the high-tech guidance of, say, an instrument landing system. And then you can see where it continues over the runway now, which is where the go-around begins, and then it goes into this right turn back out over the sea, where they position all the way back round again to this straight-in, typical kind of what we call a straight-in ILS, which is an instrument landing system approach, which in Nice isn't often used. It's only really used when the weather is poor. Yeah. And that's simply because it goes straight over the top of Antibes, which is full of very wealthy people who don't like aeroplane noise.
Yeah, because that's a very interesting point here, right? Why does these two approaches look so different from each other? And if there is an instrument landing system approach, an ILS approach, then why wouldn't they fly that to start with? So maybe we should kind of go into that. And also, it should be mentioned here that in the METAR, as in the actual weather observation at the time of this approach, I don't know if we have if we have an overlay of that.
No, but what I can do is I can read that to you as we go through this.
So if you read out what the weather was at the time of this approach.
So the weather that was being reported at the time that this aircraft was on the approach was a very light wind. So the wind was coming from the southeast at 4 knots, which is very light and variable. And it was actually varying in direction quite a bit, which is normal. It's calm wind. It was giving a visibility of 9 kilometers or 9,000 meters. And it was giving light thunderstorms of rain, few cloud at 2,300 feet, and cumulonimbus clouds at 3,000 feet, which are the thunderstorm clouds, and broken cloud higher up. But they're also giving what we call a tempo. Now, a tempo in a meteorological report basically means on and off. It means it's there and then it's kind of getting better and then it's there again within like a shorter period of time. But in that time, it's actually giving the wind being variable, gusting up to 35 knots, which is strong.
Yeah.
And that's typically, that will be because there is now a thunderstorm just passing over the head as this METAR is being taken in heavy thunderstorms of rain with broken cloud at 1,400 feet. So it's very changeable weather for one.
Yeah. But it's interesting because that weather report is actually going to be quite important for what we're going to be looking at next. Because, right, so we're talking about the weather situation where you have very heavy showers and thunderstorms around, but general visibility is pretty okay, and there are some openings in the clouds. So, as we were saying before, the ILS is not often used because of noise. So, what kind of other option do we have coming into Nice for this runway then?
Sure. So there's two main types of options which are normally flown going into Nice when we're doing this northeasterly runway arrival, and we can bring both of them up. We can bring them up on screen now. So there's typically either a what we call an RNP approach to a visual, which is the one you're seeing on your left, where we fly a standard instrument arrival and an approach, but you can see that it's this black line where it says non-precision for initial approach, that little box where you see that black line beginning. That's where the aircraft are tracking. They're tracking north. So they're flying an approach, effectively heading north, almost, well, a good 45, 50 degrees off the runway extended centerline. And all that's doing is it's allowing the crew to follow a standard instrument approach, which gives us all the protection of terrain avoidance, gives us accurate tracking, but to get to a position where we can descend safely and become visual with the runway. And then once we get to that last waypoint before where it goes a dashed line, the 04 alpha waypoint, we transition onto the chart on the right. And you'll see that's all dashed arrows. What that means is it's a visual element of the approach. So once we get that starts now at that 04 alpha waypoint, the crew are going to continue tracking north until they intercept the extended centerline of what should be 04 left normally for that arrival. And the reason that, as we said, is noise abatement, just to try and prevent unwanted aircraft noise flying over very wealthy areas. So most of the time, I don't think I've ever flown an ILS going into Nice. It's always been this, either an RMP, typically going to the visual.
Yeah, and it should be also to clarify then the RMP, the left side of this, is actually an approach flown using GPS.
Yeah,
and normally flown using autopilot.
Very
so
much
just like any other instrument approach that we fly using autopilot, very nice and easy handled. But the late part there, the dashed part, the right side of this is hand flown. And anytime that you do a visual approach, this is something that you need to see the runway that you're going to land on, right? So you have to already at that point see the runway. You have to have it in your mind, like that's where I'm going to get down, and then you are going to disconnect the autopilot and you're going to fly this visual segment down to that runway that you see. Right? So this is obviously, if you I don't know if we can zoom in on the left one of these plates.
We might be able to bring that up in a moment, actually, but yes.
Yeah.
What you're going to say? Because what I would say on this one is that going into Nice, anyone has flown into Nice will know that the workload is generally a lot higher for the flight crew compared to going into, say, an what I call a normal airport where you have a straight-in approach. Because when we're doing these non-precision approaches, which is what an RMP approach is effectively, or this type of approach, it's a lot more briefing involved, that we have to use different modes on the autopilot. And there's also like step down altitudes where we'll get to a minimum altitude at a certain waypoint, and then we have to step down to the next waypoint. And we're actively doing this as we go along. And the workload's a lot higher. And obviously, as soon as we go visual, we're now manually flying the aircraft with the Mark 1 eyeball looking out the window, trying to visually maneuver this airliner with hundreds of people down the back. So again, the workload's quite high. So that's the first thing I would say to have in the back of your mind when we're looking at these approaches.
Yeah. The second thing that I want to point out, which is something that you said before, Ben, is that if you look down into the right bottom corner of this plate, you'll see the sealing required. Okay.
Yeah.
And you'll see that there's a day box and a night box. Now, this was 23:32 local time, which at this time of year is pitch black in this. So this is definitely nighttime. And you can see there that the ceiling and visibility required here is 10 kilometers of visibility and
2,000 meters.
And a 2,000
feet. Sorry, 2,000 feet cloud. Yeah.
2,000 feet cloud base. And if you paid attention when Ben was going through the METAR, as in the weather, they actually had a 9-kilometer visibility. They didn't have a 10-kilometer visibility. So for this one to be flown, it would have been marginal, right? And it wouldn't strictly been even allowed if they actually flew this one.
No, I mean, there possibility. I mean, these charts are very standardized, so everyone's kind of operating off from the same page, literally. But there is a possibility that different operators might have a different approval based on different aircraft types. So it's not 100%. No. But based on the information that I see, this is the minimum vis for this approach is 10 kilometers.
Yeah, and in any case, 10 kilometers, 9 kilometers, there would have been pretty good visibility. So you could see why someone would go in and possibly be cleared for this approach anyway. But the interesting bit here is obviously that 45-degree dogleg, because if we go back to the ADS-B data, Navin, if you can bring that back on screen, you can see that it matches up pretty closely with the track that we can see here, right? So the likelihood of them using some type of variation of this approach is pretty high.
Yeah, I think it's clear to see that that's what they were using. And one other thing, while we're talking about visibility, particularly at nighttime, we know from the METAR that there was either light rain or heavy rain, depending on where they were in relation to that part of the forecast. When you're flying an aircraft, a bit like when you're driving your car, if you're driving in rain, you've got the windscreen wipers going, it's going to be flowing up the windscreen. Yes, it's 9-kilometer visibility, but that doesn't mean you can see clearly behind your window.
No.
That will play a part into what they could actually see out that window.
Yeah. So what we really want to point out here is the visual part, right? Whenever we're doing visual approaches, that visual element is a bit of a risk. If you compare to what we do when we're flying an ILS approach, where we have instrument that tells us exactly that we are on the center line of the correct runway. Yep. If you're going in for a visual, it's always going to be the perception of the pilots to decide which runway they're going towards. And at an offset of 45 degrees, when you have two parallel runways pretty close to each other, that area when you're coming at 45 degrees, it's actually quite dark in that area. Like you would think that the runway lights, for example, would be really, really bright from all directions, but it's not really. It's pretty dark, and you have two distinct runways here. And another feature which a lot of people don't think about in this is that there's no approach light system to any of these runways going out into the sea, and that's very rare.
Yeah, but if you look at places, that do have approaches over the sea, places like San Francisco, that you'll see like almost like a pier going out to sea, housing all the lights that lead the pilot into the runway. And if you had that on 04 left, for example, and you didn't have it on 04 right because they were turned off, that would eliminate or massively reduce the chance of getting the wrong runway. But they don't. There's no approach lights at all. All they have are what we call high intensity runway lights, which mark the edge of the runway and centerline lights and the end of the runway. But the problem with those lights is that they're not kind of omnidirectional. You can't see them from a 360-degree pattern. They're designed to be very high intensity, but pointing down the axis of the runway. And one thing that came to mind for me with that is when you're approaching that runway now from a 45-degree angle, runway 04 right is the first runway that's going to become clear.
Yeah, correct.
So what you can imagine the scenario now where they're working hard, the wipers are going, the rain's falling, it's dark, and they just see that runway appear. It'd be very easy you can see how that could happen.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. But this is what I often, when I do my incident investigations and the videos, whenever there's a visual segment, a visual approach involved, I do highlight these risks, right? Because you become susceptible to human error at a much deeper level than you would when you fly an instrument approach. And I'm sure that when it comes to the investigation here, we're probably going to see the BA looking very closely into, for example, lighting on the airport, because there's no question that if that was a part of it, as in if the visual part was part of this problem, which I'm going to guess that it is, then the lighting of the airport is going to be very important.
Yep.
Now, then obviously they continued, and people will ask them, the questions will come saying like, well, if you are lined up with the wrong runway and there's another aircraft on the runway, wouldn't you see that far out? You have 9 kilometers visibility and stuff. But again, like you pointed out, if there was actually a rain shower on final as possible, you'd have the wipers going. It will be a lot of lights as part of the runway picture. And from the back, you would see the collision light potentially, and then the nav lights and the white light on the tail. But as we saw when I did the Toronto incident, which is extremely similar to this, right, where he lined up with a taxiway instead of a runway because of a visual illusion, because one of the runways had been closed and they hadn't noticed or seen that note time. The lights can be a little bit deceptive. And if you're not expecting to see something, if you're expecting to land on the runway, and you've gotten clear to land, which they clearly had, then maybe you're not really scanning for an aircraft there. So your mind would be predisposed to not see these signs and only maybe see them as you're getting much, much closer and the aircraft comes into the cone of the landing lights, which is very late.
It is really late, and you and I have both flown thousands of approaches where there's aircraft either landing in front of us 2 or 3 miles ahead, and it's not easy to see. Even in daytime, it's very easy for a white aircraft with grey wings to disappear against like a light-coloured runway that's 2 or 3 miles away. You factor in nighttime, it's almost impossible to see an aircraft until you're almost on top of it, I would say.
Yeah,
unless you're really expecting it and looking at it.
Yeah, and in this case, they must have made this decision pretty late. They would at 50 feet, just to give you an idea, at 50 feet you're over the runway threshold, right? Yeah. So if you're flying a normal 3 degrees glide, you should be at 50 feet over the runway threshold, and that is about 20 feet before you start the flare generally with this size of aircraft. So the fact that they were at 50 feet when they went around, it's possible that they actually started to go around a little bit earlier than that, and that the aircraft continued to descend down to 50 feet before it started climbing again. But in any case, it would have been way too close for comfort. And the two pilots in the EasyJet aircraft, especially if they had to stop their takeoff roll because they saw an aircraft just like thundering in front of them, because they would have seen that. This would have been the scare of their life, I would say.
It would be terrifying.
It would be terrifying, for sure. Which is indicated by the fact that they taxied in and then canceled. Now, there are a couple of possibilities when it comes to why that flight was canceled. We don't know how the pilots were feeling. We are encouraged to not fly if we feel upset. So if they got a real scare, they would have been all in their right to just say, that's it for me today. I'm going to stop this. But equally, they would have also known that this was an extremely serious incident. And whenever you are part of an extremely serious incident, part of it is that you need to preserve whatever evidence there is.
Right.
In this case, that would be the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. And the cockpit voice recorder, you need to actually pull the circuit breaker for, and then that needs to be removed, because that's now evidence.
Yeah.
An aircraft cannot continue to fly without the cockpit voice recorder. Now, Nice is a base for EasyJet, as far as I know. So there would be a possibility that they had a backup cockpit voice recorder to replace it with. But if that's not the case, well, then that aircraft is grounded until that has been replaced.
Yeah, and both of those make equal sense to me. Nobody wants a pilots that are flying if they're all shaken up from what's just happened. Of course not. Mine's not going to be on it. But yeah, the second element to that is also exactly right.
Yeah, no, and the airlines always back you up. At least a good airline will always back you up if you feel that. No, I mean, I'll just give you an example. When my second boy was born, when I was actually on getting ready to do a flight.
Okay.
My wife was 9 months pregnant, but as you know, you never know. It's going to be today or it's going to be in a week. So I was continuing to fly, and then I had boarded an aircraft in the morning. I had prepared to fly down to, I think, Paphos, which is a long flight from Stockholm, where I was based. It's like a 4:20 flight one way. And we had prepared everything, and all of the passengers were boarded. We were ready to push, and I was just about to turn off my phone, which you do then. And as I was about to turn it off, it rang, and I looked down, and it was my wife. So I took it, and she's like, he's coming now. And obviously, if I had not gotten that message, I would have been perfectly okay to fly, But now I got that message, which means that my head is not on the job anymore. And I knew as soon as she said that I cannot fly now. This is impossible now. So I called my employer up, the ops controller, and said, listen, this has happened. My wife is about to give birth. I'm sitting here with a full aircraft. We're 5 minutes away from pushing, but I cannot fly. I have to offload myself. And there was not a question.
No.
They just like, absolutely, go to your wife. I went out into the cabin, made a PA to the passengers saying that, listen, I'm very sorry. There's going to be a slight delay, but my son is being born, so I have to leave you, and my company will take care of you. And obviously, given that explanation, the passengers understood. And what happened was that we just rolled over. So there was, captains coming in that was supposed to do a slightly later flight. They just jumped onto mine, did mine instead, and rolled the delay on, and then flew in a captain from London, actually, who did the last wave. So the delay was not that bad, but it goes to show that the airlines will always support your pilots, or should always support the pilots if they come in with a valid reason not to fly.
Yeah, for sure.
But what I want to do now is we're not going to speculate more on what mistakes has happened here. We know that mistakes has happened, and we are going to learn exactly why and the background to it. But what I wanted to focus on is the kind of barriers that we have in order to keep these things from happening in the first place. So if we start by looking at the barriers that we pilots have to make sure that this doesn't happen, what comes up in your mind?
I think the first thing that comes to mind when a successfully flown approach begins right back in the briefing, when you're up in the cruise with a coffee or whatever, and you're going to go now through and methodically brief. And one thing that maybe a lot of people might not be aware of is that the briefings that we do are very structured. They follow a very set pattern, so that the person you're briefing is expecting you to kind of cover a certain topic, whether it's an approach element, a landing element, a taxi element, whatever it might be. But we stick to a very, very structured briefing. And that, if we brief properly, we're going to identify potential threats. And a threat is something outside of our control, potentially, that could cause an error on our part. So when we're looking at a threat, we're gonna then identify it. So we're recognizing it for one, and then we're only doing really half the job if we're talking about a threat. Because when we're talking about a threat, we've got to be speaking about what we're then going to do to mitigate that threat. So one of them might be the lack of approach lights. There are parallel runways, a lack of an approach lights. That's outside of our control. We can't do anything about that, but it could lead to an error. So what are we going to do to mitigate that? And then we will have a discussion, and we'll look at what tools we have to try and prevent that electronically in our flight deck, and also the awareness that we share between both of us, that we're now aware that this is a threat, that we could identify the wrong runway. So we're going to be on it when we're actually identifying it.
Right, which is something that when you're doing approaches into parallel runways, you always brief. Right, there's a list of threats normally if you have an airport brief, for example, that states parallel runway operations. So it should be at the top of your mind as there is a possibility to make this mistake. How do we what happens? We verify what clearance we've gotten, and we verify that we're on the correct approach path. So an accurate briefing, especially when you're doing a visual approach, is extremely important. A lot of people think that it's easier to fly a visual approach because, now you don't have to worry about all of those pesky instruments and stuff. You can just disconnect and kind of hand ring it in. But the fact is that because the threats are higher, because you have less backup, it's actually more important to do a proper briefing when you do a visual approach than if you do a standard ILS approach, for example.
Yeah.
So I absolutely agree. The briefings would be the first barrier. Now, second barrier, in my view, would be we do have loads of different tools in the cockpit to help us here. So we have things like fix pages, at least on the Boeing, that you can enter the runway into and extend the scent line. That's very helpful when you do a visual approach into parallel runways, because you can clearly see that, if you're off to the right, like in this case, you will see that the scent line that you're supposed to follow is to your left on your navigation display. So it looks really weird, and the pilot monitoring will be able to see that very clearly, even if the pilot flying is focusing outside.
Yes. And that could be something that when we're talking about threats, you could then, okay, right, how do you think we can mitigate that? The Petter would then go, look, let's put this into our fixed page. So we're on our navigation display now. We're going to see a visual representation graphically on our navigation display. And we need to be lined up with that particular graphic to make sure we're on the center line. If we're not, then tell me. And now we've helped mitigate that. So that's one of the tools we have.
And then we have something that at least I think is brilliant, which is in the Boeing it's called the RAAS, the RAS system, which is runway awareness and
advisory
system.
Yeah.
And the RAS basically tells us it's set up so that it uses GPS positioning and it feels, for example, which runway we are approaching. So it will give automatic callouts, approaching runway 04 right, approaching runway 04 left. And it will give warnings like wrong runway, for example. Now, I don't know the Airbus that well, and I don't know exactly the system they're using, but I'm gonna assume that something similar possibly had been available, even if that is an extra add-on.
I would imagine it is, because it's not a Boeing feature. It's like a Honeywell. It's something that's brought in.
Yeah.
So that I think is shared across multiple fleets. So I'd imagine they've got something very, very similar, if not the same.
Yeah, and that is unless that is installed, it's something that I think should be installed. I mean, it shouldn't be an add-on. It should be something that's standard, because it's it's the same. Like it gives, for example, long landing warnings as well.
Yeah.
So one thing that's maybe one of the hardest things for us pilots to do is to kind of judge when we've been floating too far, when it's not touching down and the aircraft continues kind of floating over the runway, just eating up runway. And if you're a pilot flying, every fiber of your being says, I can get it down and then I get it stopped. But in reality, you're now eating up a lot of valuable braking distance, right? And this system comes in and it calculates how much runway you have left. And it will actually tell you, like, long landing, go around, just give you that. So the RAS system, I think, is a brilliant new additive in our toolbox.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I want to highlight is just use an ILS approach, especially if the weather is poor. Like if the weather is marginal, there is an ILS approach available. It's at night time. Yeah, okay. Some rich people might be pissed off, but let them be pissed off.
But the thing with that, there are incredible noise fines for airlines if you fly the wrong approach or you deviate from the approved path. I mean, tens of thousands of pounds or euros.
But it's not going to be, if you are cleared for an ILS approach, you're not going to get any noise fines.
No. It's only if you deviate or do something unapproved, which they wouldn't do. But there's a good argument. If the weather was 9 kilometers, you need 10, then that's black and white.
Yeah, and it's like, nope, sorry, cannot do it. We need to do an ILS. And of course, like we said before, if you do an ILS approach, then your instruments is going to show you. If they would fly an ILS approach and then they would try to land around with 04 right instead of 04 left, you would be way off your localizer.
Yeah.
Right? You're not stabilized anymore. So with an ILS approach, it would never happen. And Navin, if you can help us to bring up the ADS-B picture again. Just to show you here, the second approach that they flew obviously was an ILS approach, and just look at how straight that is. If you compare it to the kind of wobbly track of the first approach, which is clearly visually flown, the second is like a dart. And that's because it's flown using the ILS, right? It's very, very exact. And as you can see, there's no question that they're going into the correct runway there. While if you can actually see that the initial part of the turn kind of looks like, on the first approach, it kind of looks like it was going towards the correct runway, but then it makes a bit of a nick over to the right. So it's going to be super interesting to hear the voice recordings in this incident, like to hear what actually went on here, because I think this is going to be one of those that we can learn a lot from once the investigation is on the way.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that nobody was hurt, it's just a free lesson, isn't it, for everybody?
Exactly. And that's exactly how we work in aviation. Like, this is why I love this. And this is why I thought it was important to do this live video as well, because we can use this, even if we don't know exactly what happened here, we can do live videos like this where we explain, okay, so how do pilots react and how do we think and where are the threats and barriers in situations like this? And hopefully someone who's sitting out there listening to this will learn something even from that, even before we have the report available to us. Now, ATC, let's say that this was an ATC problem then, that they were cleared for the incorrect runway, which is a possibility. You know, what kind of barriers do we have when it comes to ATC?
I mean, with ATC, I know they're a radar environment in Nice, so they would have a radar return in their tower. They would see on that, they would have a drawn extended center line, a bit like we have on our navigation display. And then we would have a radar plot, our radar return of where that aircraft is in relation to the airport. But they don't, particularly a tower controller, they're not looking at that. A bit like the pilots on a visual approach, tower controllers are more looking out of the window, controlling outside of their airport. But they do have radar inside their tower, which they could reference. So there is that. They'll output the ATIS, which is an automatic terminal information service, which is the weather that the tower put out to pilots, and they update it every half an hour, and it will give them the runway in use typically. For arrivals, expect runway 04 left, or right, depending on whatever it was. So this can help either confirm what they were briefing or actually go, hang on a minute, they said 04 right? You know, we were planning on 04 left, or vice versa.
Exactly. And if you're used to flying into Nice, if they would have been cleared for runway 04 right, only that would have been cause to ask, confirm? Yeah. Confirm 04 right, because we never land on 04 right ever.
It's rare, and even in the charts, it says to you 04 left is the preferred runway for landing. You know, it does happen sometimes on 04. I've been there before where there was work in progress on 04 left, so they only had one runway. So you know, it's used for landing, but everybody knows that goes in there that 04 left is the preferred arrival runway. So it should trigger. Hang on a minute, why 04 right?
Exactly. So yes, even if an air traffic controller would make a mistake and clear, because that would have been a mistake, if they would, you never know, someone says the wrong, 04 right instead of 04 left, it can happen. But even if that's the case, there should be barriers in there that would stop pilots, at least get pilots to question it. So like I said, in this case, obviously, it was way too close to comfort, and one of the reasons that we want to discuss this is because these kind of close calls are kind of on the rise. We've seen several of them happening in the United States over the last couple of years, and now this one is in Europe. So this obviously has to do a lot with the fact that there's more and more air traffic, there's more and more congestion. Probably not the case at 11:30 at night in Nice, but there's no question that we as an industry need to start taking this very seriously, because there's only so many close calls before there's actually a real accident, which we saw obviously in the DC mid-air collision that happened in January. So this is something that we are taking serious, and I'm gonna hesitate to guess that there's going to be restrictions to that visual approach.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing that you mentioned there is it was 11:30 at night. These were acclimatized crew. This is midnight. They're potentially fatigue plays an issue here. Crew could be tired.
It's hard to know. We don't know what kind of duties they've had before. If this was the last sector of a long day, for example, those are the kind of things that definitely play a part as well. So as always, there's loads and loads of stuff that plays a possible role here. But those are the things that I felt like we needed to discuss. It would be really interesting to hear now, because we are doing this live. If anyone out there have any questions, if you send in your questions now in the chat, then we can take a few of them to answer before we finish off this time.
There's a good point here by JDorg0302. He was saying that he's surprised that ATC didn't notice the misalignment. And that's a fair comment. But I think one thing I would say is because these parallel runways are actually very close to each other, and particularly you factor in a bit of a crosswind because that wind was gusty, an aircraft can kind of be crabbing or pointing in a different way. It can be very difficult from the ground to judge that lateral distance between an approach on one runway, particularly at nighttime, and an approach on another. Yeah. So yes, you'd hope it would happen, but I can understand how that could easily be not seen.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It looks easy, but it's definitely not.
No.
Let's see. Is there anything else that pops up here? We had a super chat question, which we do thank you for. That's good support of the podcast specifically. Any plans to have Captain Steve on the podcast? So we are actually going to start taking guests onto the podcast, right? And again, if you're watching this on Mentor Pilot or Mentor Now, I hope that you have subscribed to the Captain Speaking podcast. It's a separate YouTube channel, right? And what you're seeing here now, me and Ben kind of just talking about stuff that we love and stuff that we want to explain. That's what you get on the podcast, right? Normally about an hour-long episode. So go and subscribe to Captain Speaking if you haven't already. And we are going to start having guests. There's some quite cool guests lined up, actually. We haven't decided when we will start that yet, but it's going to come very soon. Now, Captain Steve is not on that roster, but there are some other really cool people that I think that you're enjoy hearing from.
Very, very cool. Let's have a look. So there's some questions here. Let's have a look. So Geeky Tim. Hi, Geeky Tim. Question. ILS approach. Why are rich people more important than the rest when it comes to aircraft noise? Surely the most suitable route should be the used one. I think that's what we kind of say in a briefing when we've got to do this massively long briefing to do this visual curved approach. Money talks, I guess.
Well, and also to be perfectly honest here, there are a lot of areas where there's not rich people that also get these noise complaints quite often.
True.
In Barcelona, for example, there are these noise monitoring stations everywhere, and it has nothing to do with income. It has just to do with not disturbing people's night sleep. So yes, in around Nice there are a lot of rich people, but it doesn't necessarily impact this, even though it's fun to say. Right, so there are some people that are saying that there's a possibility that this was not an ILS, but that was it. There was an RMP approach, which is perfectly possible, right? But it doesn't really matter. It's the same principle. If they flew a GPS guided RMP approach in for runway 04 left instead, it would have also guided them down to the correct runway. So an ILS and RMP, it doesn't really matter.
No, and I think all of the RMP approaches that they all kind of terminate on that base leg point, which is where you turn final. There's nothing that really takes you in. But there's another question here from Enzi. It says, maybe a dumb question from a flight simmer not flying the big birds, but wouldn't it be possible to start with that curved RMP approach and then pick up the ILS, which was a good question. In other words, once you kind of get to that visual point, have the ILS tuned, and then you can position onto it. Now, that's a very good question. And on 04 left, believe it or not, that is actually what we do in my operation. If it's working, we will have that ILS tuned. Because although we're not going to actually officially track it, we'll see when we're on the center line. We'll see when we're on the correct approach. It's just another tool in our arsenal that we can use. But on 04 right, often that might be turned. It could be turned off. Same with 04 left. So they may not be operating, or they may not have just had it tuned. So it depends on that local operator. But you're exactly right. That would really help, and something that I personally use going in there.
Oh yeah. And there's no reason not to use any aid that is available. You should use it for sure.
Yeah.
People are asking, was there any contact? No, as far as we know, there was no contact between the two aircraft. So it was just a very, very close call. But it's among the closest calls that I've ever seen. Yeah. If this could be as close to a couple of meters away, right? And people, these aircraft are flying at 200 kilometers per hour as it's coming in for approach. So if you coming in with a 70-ton aircraft at 200 kilometers per hour, you don't want to have a couple of meters only. And because it descends as part of the missed approach as well. So this was a serious one for sure. And when I saw this, I was being sent loads of questions and stuff on social media, which I love, by the way. That's the way that we find some of our discussion items. I first thought, this is just the press. They're building a hen out of a feather here, and it's a go around, yada yada yada. That happens every day. But then I started looking into it. I started looking, and I started to get ADS-B data from it, and I realized no,
this is not good.
This is not at all a standard go around.
No. There's a really good question here, actually, Petter, from Benoit, saying that wouldn't TCAS be able to report the traffic, knowing that one aircraft is still on the ground and the other is at a low altitude? And that's a really good question, because TCAS, for those of you who maybe don't know, is a traffic collision avoidance system, which is an incredible system that's massively enhanced safety over the recent years. But it shows other aircraft where we are, and it shows us where other aircraft are. And if we get too close, it will come up with a warning. It will come up with like a climb or a descend. And what Ben was saying there is, why would that not save it? Well, the problem with that is once it's closer to the ground, a lot of the warning systems are no longer active, particularly when you're that close to the ground. They become deactivated essentially. So when you're that close to the ground, you probably won't necessarily get the advisories that you would do if you were up at 2,000 feet.
You wouldn't, like below 1,000 feet, you wouldn't get an RA, and I think below 500 feet or something like that, you wouldn't get an oral traffic warning. You'll get traffic on
It'll come up on
the navigation display. So it'll say traffic, but then again, it's not that uncommon that you'll get that from people that switches on the transponder standing on the holding point, waiting to enter the runway for departure.
Even Ranger vehicles have it, don't they? The yellow vehicles that drive around, they have a transponder you can see too.
Yeah, so that would definitely not have brought up much attention. Like TCAS is built to avoid collisions in the air, not ground collisions per se. J Baker 88 is asking, what's RMP? Sorry, that's required navigational performance. It's basically a GPS approach.
Yeah, so there's no external transmitters on the ground that will transmit like a beacon that you then track. This is all built into the aircraft using GPS data.
Yeah. So Vlad Masi is asking, hello, if the runways are so close together, why would there be an aircraft on the runway and one landing on the other? Well, that is something that it's up to each airport to apply for. First of all, there is standard separation between the runways. All right. So providing that the runways are a certain number of meters apart, which I can't remember exactly what it is now, you can have parallel runway operations with coming in and landing from one and taking off from the other. And generally speaking, that's not really an issue, right? You can have problems, obviously, where one aircraft takes off and another one makes a missed approach and you get close to each other. But in those kind of situations, the airports have to apply to the authorities for an exception from certain rules. And if the authorities find that, yes, there are mitigation procedures, for example, the missed approach is turned away from the other runway or something like that, then it's approved. And we see that in many, many runways around.
Yeah. And Sasha brought up a question here. Is it possible that the incident will be a catalyst for improving runway lighting, etc.? Possibly. It could be that when there is parallel runway ops in force, that there can only be the landing runway in sight. You know, there can only be a PAPI, for example, or the approach lights for the landing runway. Who knows? It's certainly possible.
Absolutely, and these are the kind of things, especially when they start to get a lot of press as well, like this, that are catalysts for changes, which is one of the reasons that we wanted to make this podcast as well. So, did you see any more questions, or should we start to round this up?
I think that's pretty much it here. I mean, Juanfra here has just got a similar thing that we spoke about, saying, can you do an ILS approach if they clear you for a visual? Well, if it's a straight-in approach and the ILS is working, then certainly you could use that. But the problem with, as we've said, for 04 right, maybe the ILS wasn't working. We don't know, but it's certainly possible.
But also, this is also important to remember that air traffic controllers are there to help and to facilitate the air traffic, right? So as a pilot, you can always request it. Yeah. You can come in and you can say that, for example, in this case, the weather is not great. I'm not comfortable with doing the visual. I request the RMP or the ILS approach if it's available. And ATC will generally accept that. There might be a slightly longer vector, for example. It might take a little bit of time. But I've never been denied an instrument approach if I wanted it.
No, me neither.
So I know who you're pretending I am that is asking a question.
Okay. I was wondering where that was going.
Yeah, why would 04 right come into sight first after the 45-degree turn? And that's because if you're coming from, in this case, from the east, southeast in this case, the runway 04 right is closer. Right, so it's going to be the one that comes up first, especially if you're in a heavy rain shower. It's closer to you coming from that direction than 04 left is.
Yeah.
You can, well, this one you can see it if you'll be coming from the right, effectively on this picture, and turning in towards the runways here, and it's also longer. So,
it is long
and closer to you, so that would make sense.
Yeah.
So Neo Karen is saying, what drives me crazy in this is how fast they can decide to change the runway. And not just which one, but the actual direction of landing. Yeah.
Get me started on that.
Amen to that.
That and Marseille, if you're listening, you need to sort that out.
Yeah.
It's not good.
No, it's just not okay. Because as you can hear, we've just gone through how important it is to do briefings and how we go into all of the details and all of the little minute things that you need to think about for each runway. Now imagine that you're coming in, you've briefed all of this, you're just about to start the approach, or you're a bit out and you're preparing for it, and then they say, oh, by the way, we've not only changed runway, we changed runway direction as well, for no particular reason.
The best one I had of that, I was actually a training day with a new cadet. We're going down to Marseille, and Marseille is very similar to this. It's got 2 parallel runways, and the approach is very, again, quite challenging. A lot of briefings to be had, non-precision approaches. And this FO had done an amazing job with this great briefing of going into this runway we'd expected. And we get to top of descent, about to start descending, and we get a runway change to the other end of the runway. We're like, oh, okay. So we do a whole briefing again in the descent now, which is increasing workload, increasing risk. Just finished the descent checks. They call us again. We're now moving on to the parallel runway. So this poor cadet now is like, I've got no idea. So I said, look, you take control. I'll brief you now, and I'll do the landing on this because it's getting a bit tricky. We're getting lower. Finished that briefing, which I did quite efficiently. They changed it a 4th time. To the point where I said, guys, you've got to make your mind up here. This isn't good.
No.
It shouldn't be happening. But yeah, anyway, don't get me started on that.
Cool. Yeah, but I think that's quite a few questions. Now, the beauty of the Captain Speaking podcast, by the way, which again, go and check it out here on YouTube, is that we want you to send in your questions. So when you're watching one of those videos, send in your questions there. And Spiros, my lovely scriptwriter on Mentor Now, he decides on the questions that he thinks this is interesting, and then he feeds them to us, and we actually respond to them. Either we do that live as we do now on the podcast, or we actually might make a whole episode around it if we think that it's interesting enough. So definitely go and check it out. Another thing that I want to mention as well, you'll see at the very top of the comment section, I have attached our sponsor. We're actually not sponsored for this episode, but I just think Ground News does a really good job when these kind of things happen, because if you go to Ground News, you'll see that they will list up all of the different outlets that are reporting on this. So you can easily go in there and kind of pick and choose, right? Which one, what is this one saying? What are that one saying? We can kind of find the golden middle ground with Ground News, which I think is really cool, and it's really helpful on breaking news, especially because there is a lot of garbage out there. The first couple of articles that I read about this incident yesterday were horrendous. They must have been AI written. Like that is just full of superlatives about, like you said, 300 people in each aircraft. This could have been 600 people dead. Like, and those kind of things you do avoid by using Ground News. So go and check them out. I highly recommend it.
Sure.
Do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's it. Great. There's some great questions here. It's great to see so many here as well. So hopefully we'll see you over on the podcast.
Absolutely. And let me know as well, if you're watching this on Mentor Pilot, let me know if you want me to do more live streams on Mentor Pilot, because this is actually the first live stream on Mentor Pilot that I'm doing in 3 years. The last live stream that we did was when we passed 1 million subscribers to Mentor Pilot. And after that, I have not done any, but we've started through Captain Speaking, done a little bit of Mentor Now, and now we're including Mentor Pilot as well, because I actually think, I love interacting with people. And as you can see here, when it's unscripted, it becomes very real and very raw. And that's something that I just love. And just doing it together with you as well, Ben, makes it so much easier, because we can kind of bounce off each other.
Absolutely.
It's super, super nice to do, and it doesn't, like, I would love to do more of it. So if you guys are watching this and you think that's a good idea, let me know, and we will certainly do more of them, especially when stuff happens out there that you can maybe want to get explained.
Sure.
Good. And on that note, I want to say good night. I'm going to go home. I'm actually doing a podcast interview with the captain of Qantas Flight 32 tomorrow, Richard de Crespigny, on his podcast, which is called Fly, by the way. So you should check that out when that comes available. But I have that early in the morning, so I have to go and get some sleep.
Good luck.
Good. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. And I hope to see you on the Captain Speaking podcast very soon.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.